Welcome back, everybody, to the Artificial Intelligence live stream. I am Jon Radoff. I'm the CEO of a company called Beamable. We make live services infrastructure for game companies. I'm accompanied here by Oscar, who keeps us on track through every one of these episodes. And I'm so excited today because I have one of my favorite people in the entire artificial intelligence landscape, and that is Bilawal Sidhu. Bilawal is hot off talking at Harvard XR. He was at TED interviewing Eric Schmidt. He is one of the people who I really started watching early on in the formation of generative AI over the last few years, because he did so many interesting things actually applying these technologies, and not just in a simplistic way, actually chaining together the different technologies to do really interesting work. So Bilawal, thanks for joining me on this once again. We talked, I think, a couple of years ago, back when I was a YouTuber and I didn't do things live. Now we do things live so that everybody can actually ask gotcha questions along the way from the audience.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the generous introduction. And yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah, 2 years ago, I think, right when this generative stuff was like popping off and hitting the mainstream. And guess what? That train's been it's going choo, 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 and seeming to proceed without any signs of slowing down. So it's great to be here.
So it wasn't hype. It seems like it's lasted a few years now, or if it's still hype, it's the hype train that won't stop, I guess. But right. I use ChatGPT pretty much every day. I mean, I'd say at this point probably 10 to 20 times a day, and it's not even the only one I use. I use Claude as well, and I use generative art programs for doing just day-to-day work. So like, generative AI has certainly impacted my life. I'm one of the guys who says thank you to ChatGPT. Apparently, I'm one of the ones costing millions of dollars to
hey, it does increase model performance, right? So like, I think those extra tokens are worth it.
So, Bilawal, let's just start kind of diving right in terms of like creative workflows and how generative AI is impacting it, but maybe use that as your opportunity to reintroduce yourself to everyone here too. And because that's where you got started. That's how I learned about you, is like the shift from some of the TikTok work you were doing and then starting to use generative AI. So talk about that, what you've learned along the way, like, and what's changed in the last couple of years since we did a YouTube conversation.
I love it. This is the perfect tee up. And since I'm hot off of this talk I gave at Harvard XR, I got some slides for you, visual umami for your audience. So let me just go ahead and share my screen here. There we go. And here we are. I mean, so yeah, to give a bit of context to your viewers here is like, I got into visual effects early on as a kid. I was 11. I was into Flash animation. People might remember, goofy vector animation on the web. And I saw this show called Mega Movie Magic where basically they were showing digital compositing and the earliest instantiations of computer graphics. And I realized that same computer I was using for very cheesy, cartoony stuff could create visuals indistinguishable from reality. And of course, at that age, it meant very cheesy, fan films like this, filmed with my camcorder and my homies in the backyard. But that is basically the theme that has kind of stayed with me throughout my career. So I've spent a decade in tech, predominantly at Google, doing the utilitarian version of what I just talked about. I would call it blending the physical and digital world, working on everything from VR to 3D mapping. And yeah, I'm a creatorpreneur now and entertain on YouTube and TikTok and educate on LinkedIn, X, and a bunch of other platforms. But really to focus on sort of creation workflows, I think we're seeing this sort of, continued democratization that's become a huge buzzword, but I think it's absolutely right. But at the same time, I don't think it's like, I like to say this has never happened before, yet has happened time and time again. And you see sort of the essence of the core idea repeat itself. So maybe it was manual rotoscoping back in the days of Alice in Wonderland, and it's now generative AI video-to-video workflows with stuff that Corridor Digital is doing. But it's this like kind of trend towards simplicity and ease of use, right? And so what was a complicated multi-step workflow in After Effects is a couple clicks and new tools like Pika. To bring it back full circle to your question, I mean, it's really awesome to see how much more I can get done as like a solo creator. Like on the left, you see sort of my old waterfall workflow for, creating visual effects. You had to use a bunch of specialized tools and go through this sort of like, serial like workflow, this waterfall process to get stuff done. And a bunch of that's collapsed into a handful of tools. And that's been very exciting for me because contrary to what immediate intuition would tell people, that, hey, like suddenly I'll have all this extra free time. That's been the opposite of what I've experienced, is like suddenly you can just do more. So I'm doing more on more platforms. And so like a great example of this is this like video that I made last year that went stupid viral, and it got like 30 something million views right around this like Miami Mall incident near the new year that happened, where people thought aliens were overrunning Miami Mall. I basically used Midjourney and Runway to make this video. And there was a moment in the zeitgeist that it made sense to make this video. If this would have taken me a week to make it, I just wouldn't have made it. And so here's just a couple of other examples of stuff that I've done that would not be possible, or I certainly would not have made without AI creation tools. And I think you're seeing that on the high end too, where indies like me can start doing really cool stuff, but then like studios can set whole new standards altogether.
So we're not freed to just go live in the utopian society quite yet, with AIs just running everything for us. But the value of our time has increased. That's sort of the thing that really I took away from this conversation I had with the founder of Perplexity. And when he explained it to me, he was like, economically speaking, what this is really going to do is just increase the value of all of our time, so that everything we do is much more valuable and interesting as a result of it. We'll see in 10 or 20 years whether AI takes over completely, I guess. But
yeah. And by the way, that's a question I would like to circle back to. Maybe we end on a more philosophical or kind of future looking note, because I think, it is an interesting question when most economically productive tasks are increasingly done by machines and maybe a small number of people. What does that mean, right? Like, this person at a big lab I was talking to was basically like, I think like in 10 years, there'll be like 1,000 PMs and like 5,000 designers and maybe 10,000 engineers, and that'll be the tech industry. I'm like, holy shit, what is everyone else going to do if this is like the future that we're going towards? So just to maybe throw a little teaser out there for
let's definitely come back to that, because I think the economics of it are interesting. I'm not sure I buy that argument, but I'm going to let it process for a little bit.
Let it percolate.
So sitting here in 2025, what do you think these technologies mean to everyday creators? Like, not the people who are like you doing millions of audience members looking at content, like just the everyday person who needs to do a PowerPoint deck, or in our case, we have a lot of people in the game industry, so I can tell you the answer there is like production workflows are getting a lot faster, especially in the prototyping phase. 3D graphics, it's still really, really hard to do at scale. Production wise in like AAA games, but it is speeding up the processes quite a bit. Some people tell me that having AI is like having a lot of really talented interns that you can come in and like shape their behavior in interesting ways and get useful results out of it much faster than the alternative, which is human interns a lot of the time. What do you think this means to most folks out there?
I mean, I think you nailed it with the intern analogy. It's like, I like this meme that was going around, and I made my variation of it because it was like Nick Fury standing and having that like video chat conference with like a bunch of like, ominously lit personalities on the screen, and appended on top of it, just composite on top, was like the various vibe coding tools. And so like, the way the message I'd give to, everyone from the indie creator to, high end creators is just like, you got to lean into the tools first off. And they do increasingly feel like I'm standing over the shoulder of a human and telling them what to do, and they're doing them for me. And I think a great example of this is like the exceedingly viral multimodal image generator update to ChatGPT 4.0. And then also the same thing with Gemini. Gemini was touted by Google to be this natively multimodal model that can do multiple modalities in text, image, audio, and then do the same thing output as well. And that's cool for me because that collapsing trend is sort of continuing. Like even a year ago, or even right now for maybe certain types of production workflows, you might have to learn Comfy UI, where you're wrangling a bunch of these like purpose-built models to kind of do something as simple as like style transfer. And now I just like, say, here, if we could pull this image up very quickly, Oscar, like now I just say, hey, turn us into Roblox or GTA 3 or Minecraft or whatever. And the fact that it just works is kind of wild to me. And I think like people don't appreciate outside of AI just how hard something like this was to get right at a good hit rate in Comfy. And so like these tools are more accessible than ever before. And I think the other beauty of this is like with that collapsing, you don't have to spend the time that a bunch of other technical artists spent figuring out how to tune these knobs and dials and control net and taking custom LoRa's and like pulling that all together and figuring out the right weighting and then doing some compositing to get the final result. You just describe it like you would as a creative director to a human and get some very, very cool results. And I think that's very, very exciting here. Let me just figure out how to use this. And so that is kind of cool, right? And so people should be playing with these tools. The other thing I'd say is if you're like a novice creator and you've been very intimidated by learning some of the more advanced tools, I mean, I would be remiss if I don't bring up like vibe coding and MCP, right? Like it's like kind of wild that you've got these LLMs that can now interface with these existing classical applications and you tell it what you want. Like you provided an image reference of, hey, this is the kind of scene that I'm trying to build. Or, hey, this is the
maybe just double click on MCP a little bit because I think it's still a new concept to some people. So explain what that means and how it's different than just like iteratively chatting.
Yeah, totally. Think of it like this. It's like, you know, Anthropic describes the marketing language as like it's the USB-C connector for AI. And I just view it as an interface for, you know, your large language model of choice. Claude obviously came up with a standard, but Google's, you know, kind of adopting it, and you can use it through Cursor and then use a bunch of other LLMs. It's a way for your large language model to basically use tools like Blender, for example. And so essentially you are describing the task to think of your employee here as Claude, and Claude can now use Blender and do everything in Blender in a programmatic way. And so rather than you know, sort of ending up in sort of the F-35 cockpit that is Blender, and I mean, this is me, like I grew up on Maya, there's so many things that get baked into your head when you see a completely different new interface. You're just like, you have so much muscle memory that it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. But if you just describe what you want in natural language plus image references, for example, these systems can now control Blender for you. So to make it concrete, the example you're seeing on the right is basically, you know, Trippo it has this amazing text to and image to 3D, you know, API that you can use. But, you know, kind of collapsing those steps even further, you now just tell Claude, hey, here's the type of scene I'm trying to build. And then it decides, it decomposes your image reference into, hey, I need these 5 different kinds of assets. I'm going to kick off jobs to like generate using text to 3D, each of those individual assets, and then iteratively start refining and placing those objects in a 3D scene until you end up with something like this. Now think of that, right? Like how powerful that is as a new creator, that what would have taken you 2 or 3 weeks to learn all these intricate steps, you hit your time to first compelling render way faster. And then you've got a starting point based on your vision, not some canned tutorial, to start figuring out what do the dials do, or again, just keep using Claude or your LLM of choice as a way to interface with these existing tools. So that's remarkable. You're seeing this for Blender. I don't think we're that far off from like a Cursor for video editing too, where like these LLMs will just be able to do the edit for you in Resolve or Premiere or whatever. And that's super exciting.
I'm at the point where when I use a software application and it has a feature that's just buried in the UI somewhere, I'm like, can they just do an LLM interface to this thing? Because it's just annoying to use typical, after you're used to chat sessions or vibe coding as a way to get things done, everything else is just fucking annoying. Like I can't stand like searching through and what do I end up doing anyway? I go to an LLM and ask it how to do it. It's actually the fastest way to figure out how to use the software anyway.
I couldn't agree more. It's like it is like, hey, LLM, tell me the, you know, like the 5 steps I need to do in the F-35 cockpit to do what I'm trying to do. Why not just have it do that for you and abstract out all that complexity? And a lot of people might criticize this saying, well, you're not learning like, you know, the skills or whatever. And it's like, I would argue that like I don't think those are actually skills. Those are just the limitations of the technology that we had. The real skill would be like how to do scene layout, how to do really good lighting, how to figure out
Mhm.
like immaculate post capture like or post render compositing. And those are the higher order skills that you can still build out without needing to learn how to, do all the stuff manually. That of course you and I had to grow up doing.
It's no different than when compilers first came around, frankly.
Sure.
And there were a bunch of people who are like, all these programmers are never going to have to understand like what a register on the CPU is. Like they can just code it and it works. So it seems like LLMs are going to be the connective tissue that allow almost all software to interconnect and cooperate with each other, including like, so a couple of years ago, myself and our CTO of Beamable, we went to this A16Z hackathon, which we ended up winning. We created this dungeon master, and we had this concept that I think you would almost consider it to be MCP now, but it was very, very preliminary. We had this programming model, which was, well, when you're building a game and you don't know all the functionality that you're going to need yet, rather than code any part of that, why not just use an LLM to implement the equivalent of functions for you, and then just use something like XML to exchange data, shuttle data back and forth between the main program, which I think in principle is kind of what happens with MCP, even though it's for controlling software as opposed to adding functional modules. But LLMs, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, LLMs seem like the interface that we all wished we had for computers all along. It's what was in Star Trek, right?
It seems like it, and especially this push on like if you look at models like O3 and Gemini 2.5 Pro, where you've got like there's sort of this push towards agentic AI, which has sort of become the new buzzword, and whether that's just like very basic chain of thought thinking or like stacking things on top of that, this idea of sort of LLMs or even LLMs is such a limited term given they are multimodal now. Multimodal large models, like I don't know what the right even like let's just say LLMs for now, are like sort of the conductors of the orchestra, or sort of like the kind of they're the conductor of the orchestra and you're kind of telling the conductor exactly what to do. And I think that's super, super cool and exciting, right? And I think you're spot on. It's also connecting not just software but also making sort of content fungible in a sense that like I've really started thinking about a lot of things as like content in, content out, and not thinking of it as like text to something.
Yeah.
Which means like, yeah, you have this conversation. Yeah, one simplistic way is like, let's just transcribe it, right? But some of the ways I've started using these, LLMs is like, man, I'll record like 4 or 5 different takes for my like YouTube channel, and I'll be like, you are the creative director. Tell me which was the most energetic and take, and which had the best delivery, and which one's like the best for YouTube retention, and pull from the principles of like Daryl Eves and Patty Galloway or some insert YouTube expert that's prolifically written about this topic. And it's kind of wild that works just as well. And it's the same thing around like taming the chaos of just knowledge work too. It's like if you're collaborating with folks like I'm like doing a sponsored post for working on sponsored content for Adobe right now. And there's like, notes that you get from them, notes that you get back from your team, your own notes. And some of them are like Frame.io on annotations, and some of them are images that are annotated, and some of them are video calls. And I just love dumping all of that into AI Studio and having it just like make sense for me and kind of reference things back. And so it's like this general purpose glue connector, the baling wire duct tape with intelligence baked into it. And yeah, so it's like the conductor is right, but like a really smart conductor that knows how to play a bunch of instruments too.
The killer app for this live stream would be the day that we could feed the whole recording of the video into something and say, find the best 30 seconds of that, extract it out, or do some kind of supercut that's amazing so that we can just post the 1 minute version of the live stream. We've tried to do, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that purport to do this.
Yeah.
It's close enough.
We've tried it. Yeah, it hasn't really figured out what's most interesting in the conversation. Sometimes it figures out what the most energetic exchanges are, but I'll let you think about that for a moment, because I also want to just take a moment here for a little station identification. So we've got a few hundred people who are watching live right now. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching this conversation that I'm having with Bilawal. There's a reason we do this conversation live now instead of a recorded YouTube video, which is it allows you as the audience to actually be part of the conversation. And there's two ways you can do that. One is just post a comment. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, X, all of those. We're monitoring all of them, and Oscar will pop your questions right onto the screen. So if you have any questions about generative AI, creative workflows, becoming a creatorpreneur, I think I pronounced that correctly.
You did.
You should ask that, because you're here in the room with one of the true world experts on that, and it's a rare treat to be able to talk to someone like Bilawal. Hey, if you want to jump in live, you got a camera. We are risk takers on this stream. We'll invite you right in. Oscar will give you a StreamYard link. You can join us. It hasn't gone sideways yet, so we're going to keep doing it. But we do keep the link secret, so you have to DM us at least. So let us know if you want to participate, but please do take part in this conversation. All right, so back to sort of the editing process. I mean, my thinking is video. There's probably a lot of other cases where we could just say to generative AI or an LLM, give me the good version or the good parts. Have you seen anything like this? How close are we to that?
I mean, it all comes down to how good, like the multimodal understanding and kind of scene understanding too. I think the best one I've used thus far is Opus. Okay. So it's like, I think opus.pro. And it's after they moved to Gemini for multimodal reasoning. Because like a lot of the initial instantiation of these sort of find the best, most compelling segment was basically like take video and audio file, like transcribe the audio, and then use some LLM to sort of rank and grade, the clip worthiness of the various segments. And as a consequence, there are two issues there. One is like your timestamps on the transcript don't always perfectly correspond to the moments in the clip itself. So it's not very good at taking, like the best clips editors, if you work with them in real life, they'll like pull out a lot of dead air in the middle and know just how to take this little bit over here and that and sort of how it flows together. Models are getting better at that with sort of this, like, I believe they moved to 2.0 Flash. I don't know what they're using now. But there's an interesting blog post on it that they jointly did where now they're reasoning about the contents of the imagery too, right? Like, and so I think the more signals that these models can tap into, it will get better. But it's clearly not there yet, right? And it's funny, like my buddy Riley Brown, who's obviously like one of the, I would say, preeminent vibe coders on X, is, has been thinking about it, and like just his like background is interesting too, right? To go from like marketing and doing like B2B marketing to TikTok to now being a vibe coder, that just shows like anyone can do anything, and nobody listening to this should feel intimidated as like, oh, well, I can't go do creation or I can't do coding. If there was one time in history that you could do all these things, it would be now. But to that point, like the cursor for editing keeps coming up, and like, he had an interesting post saying like, Descript is probably the most interesting, well-positioned place to go and do that. And it's funny, they haven't quite nailed this either yet, right? Where I just want to be able to say something high order, be like, hey, find all the most, kind of juicy existential clips from this conversation I had with Jon. And I get this like stack rank list of 3 or 4 of them. But the closest I've seen is Opus, and I suspect it'll only keep getting better.
Let's zoom the camera lens out a little bit, and maybe this will put us back on the path to that original question about the future trajectory of the economy with all of this stuff. But you've had a really unique, enviable opportunity to talk to some of the greatest minds and leaders in this entire industry. Like you spoke with Eric Schmidt recently at TED. So we won't do a spoiler on like whatever that conversation was, because we're all looking forward to watching it ourselves. But you've talked to him and other people like that. Are you seeing any common themes in what you're hearing from people about what they expect from the future, or what are the areas of controversy, if not?
I think it's everyone has their perception of the possible futures, right? And, it's interesting, and it keeps flip-flopping. And you could say that like, so I, hosted the TED AI show last year and did 25 interviews around that. And it was a similar thing. Like some of the, were some of the conversations were very focused on like experts in a field and like what the future of like, I don't know, like mental health might look like, or Hollywood might look like, or, defense tech might look like. And it's interesting, all of these, professionals that are at the forefront of all of these vertical industries have their sort of, here's what happens if things go well, and here's what happens when things go badly. And some, reality is typically some combination of the two, playing out simultaneously. And so like, I think what's exciting is, we're clearly on this trend towards, again, more and more of sort of tasks that you can do on a computer are going to become more and more commodity, right? And I don't see that stopping. Like, when there were two moments for me, coming, like having learned visual effects as a kid, like, man, I spent years trying to learn some of these skill sets. And even when image generation was popping off, and that was probably right around the time we had a convo. This is like right after I think ControlNet had come out, and you'd come across my like reskinning my parents' living room video. Yeah. And man, that was like, and then after that I made like a video to video, like a hacky video to video pipeline with ControlNet and Absinthe at the time. And, then Kyber productized something like that, and a bunch of other folks did. And that felt state of the art. And I felt good at that moment in early 2023, where I was like, oh man, I got some time before video and 3D's figured out. Like, I'm chilling. And then, when Sora and then, specifically VO2 by Google dropped, it really rocked me pretty significantly because my timeline shifted. And so the other challenge with this is like all the bright minds are constantly recalibrating what the future looks like. And so, you'll see this certainly in the Eric Schmidt convo when it comes out mid next month. And you'll see this in the TED AI show conversations too, is like, as the season starts to where the season ends, people's predictions kind of change because you update your priors so much constantly. So the way I personally stay sane is I'm like, I got a decent idea where things are going to be like maybe 6 to 12 months out from now. Beyond that, the compounding, like stacking of a bunch of these crazy unlocks happening is unclear to me, right? And sometimes it's not even technological. It is something like just the industry converging on a standard like MCP that unlocks a bunch of interop between a bunch of different tools, like it's so hard to predict. So I don't have a pithy answer. What I do know is tasks that you can do on a computer will increasingly be automated. So I've been thinking about what can you do in that world, and I've certainly got a pithy take on 4 things that I encourage like young professionals and young students and even like, mid or late career professionals to do. And we can get into that if that's of interest.
Let's hear the 4.
So, of course I've got a slide for it because this was like the freaking thing that came up the most at Harvard. This was at the Graduate School of Design. And these are the 4 things that I bring up, which is like, number 1 is like a lot of people will just put their head in the sand. And, some of my creator friends kind of, and even entrepreneurs that I know write this off as like, oh, that's the Luddite crew. And I have deep empathy for folks that are feeling like they're like, I don't know, like the thing that you grew up learning is suddenly super commodity. It feels weird. I think like image artists got it first, writers got it second, and now, VFX and 3D folks are getting it. Maybe there's still time left for 3D and certainly a bunch of time left for XR and spatial computing. So maybe I feel good about it, but you got to play with the tools is point number 1. And if you don't, you are absolutely missing out. This is where I try to create some anxiety for people, a positive anxiety to get you to do this thing. But the way you should play it is I've kind of reduced it to when you're playing with these new tools, you should think of it like you're sort of in sandbox mode or architect mode. And sandbox mode is like, you're building castles in the sand and the waves are going to come in and they're going to, kind of wash everything away, and you're okay with that. But you also allow serendipity, happy accidents to happen. And you sort of like learn cool new things that you should then put in your like library of like things to try and apply that towards a concrete end in more of an architect mode where you're trying to build a piece of content, a SaaS product, whatever it is, a product experience or content. That's something that you should focus on and apply them to a concrete project. And I think if you just do those 2 things, your level of anxiety around AI will reduce too, because you'll learn the one skill that seems to be the most important one, which is the ability to adapt as these tools keep coming out. And you want to build this muscle because the rate of change is only going to get crazier, right? Like, whether people can debate the scaling laws and no, pre-training is dead and now it's about like post-training, or no, it's about like, test time compute, whatever. It doesn't matter. This stuff will there'll be a lot happening as various industries adopt this stuff. And so building that muscle of upskilling and making it fun for yourself, I think is super key. The third piece that I'd say to a lot of folks, especially folks that are hesitant to be creators, it's funny, is like one student pops into my head who was like a UPenn DMD digital media design student who graduated and is like going and doing a product job at JP Morgan. And it's funny, it was like she was super passionate about like XR and spatial and all the stuff. And it's like, yeah, I want to do exactly what you're doing, but first I'm going to go do the product thing. It's like, oh, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to go work at JP Morgan. And I was like, no hate to JP Morgan, but I was like, you just did digital media design and now you're going to go, like work at a bank. Like, maybe they're doing cool metaverse things or whatever, not to fully write them off, but it didn't feel like the highest, it didn't feel like the highest contribution based on the skill set that you've spent the last like 4 to 8 years of your career doing this master's degree, like and bachelor's degree building. But the one takeaway I gave that student and many others is to start building your island of influence, right? Like, I think this is the time, it's very cringe now. I think a lot of people are like, I'm not going to build in public. That's cringe. There's like move in silence and success speaks for itself. And people will bring out all these tropes. And I think that's like completely outdated advice. Like, unless you're working on some like deep defense tech thing where you explicitly don't want to, draw attention to it, or you've truly got some novel IP, I think for most people, they should be sharing their interests interestingly and building out some island of influence. And that doesn't have to be like millions of followers. It can be like 10,000 folks on LinkedIn could be your goal. And if you're in that niche community of like, I know so many GIS, geospatial information systems professionals who've got that 10,000, 15,000, 20,000, follower group, and they've got the heavy hitters, at the big companies, at the startups, on the customer end, on the platform end. And it's unlocked doors for them that you cannot imagine. And the second reason I would say you need to do this now is as the barriers to creation keep dropping, as we covered in the earlier part of the stream, I think this content is just going to be flooded, right? Like a lot of it will be, automated, faceless bot content, and then eventually it will be embodied bot content that will be indistinguishable from other stuff. So if you got this window now to basically become a voice that people look to and trust, I think you should be putting your interests out there and doing that in an interesting fashion. Not trying to reverse engineer the algorithm. That's the third thing I'll say is like a lot of people get into the mindset, well, like, let's go see what's hot on Google Trends or what's on like the first page of YouTube. It's like, no. This will not be fun for you unless you're sharing the things that you care about and it's fun for you to make that video. And so maybe it's not even a video. The actual last thing I'll say on this point is find the medium that you do your best work in. And that could be a Substack. It could be tweets. Like some people are so good at vague posting on X and that's their thing, but then point a camera at them and they are like, they lock up, or you meet them in real life and they can't even make eye contact. It's kind of wild, especially in the SFAI community, but oh my God, they thrive on this short form canvas, right? And so find whatever medium you're most where you do your best thinking and use that as sort of your hub and just start there. Like it doesn't have to be complicated. It could be like one LinkedIn post a day, 3 LinkedIn posts a week, whatever it is for you, just start somewhere.
To just spend a moment more on that, though, like you gave a lot of sort of the marketing reasons why it could be worth and finding your niche and the particular platform that works for you. There's a lot of advantages to building that community around yourself, but it's not only marketing, it's also feedback and information. Like when you put your information out there, and I think that's also what's scary for a lot of people is that once you put yourself out there, you also make yourself vulnerable to critique, being wrong about stuff. I'm wrong about stuff all the time, by the way. And the only way I get better is I hear that feedback from people, or I have a really productive conversation with people in which we're both partly correct and partly wrong. And sometimes you get to that amazing meeting of the minds where you can actually improve things. And I think this can exist almost anywhere but politics. Politics, it doesn't work. But everywhere else, like people who are sincerely dedicated to craft and improving things and learning how to be better at things, like just putting your stuff out there is part of how you get great at something. And in games, which is the media that I'm most familiar with, the only way you can build a great game is a lot of velocity in your process, because if you're too slow, you're going to run out of runway. You're going to the market will change too much by the time you're done, things like that.
Yep.
So velocity is important, but what you do inside that velocity is equally important. It's having a lot of shots on goal where you try things and you find out what people like or don't like, and you incorporate that feedback rapidly into your development process. So that's one of the biggest advantages of building in public. And of course, sure, if you do that well and people love what you're doing, you can end up having a marketing advantage as well. But I just want everyone to really think about the learning advantages and the product improvement advantages of putting things out there and hearing real feedback. And by the way, like, not many people want to just rip off an idea. Like really, like, you have the holistic understanding of an idea in your head. Like, you're going to carry it out. You're the one who is going to be sincere about it and see it to the end. Like, I guess there's copycats out there, but it's not the biggest thing to be worried about. The biggest thing to worry about is someone going to just do something faster and more meaningful than you. So
I think that's on point. And even if you have copycats, right, John, like it's a good thing, right? Like, it's like, holy
validation.
crap, your thing is worth emulating, right? Like,
Yeah.
it has some mimetic, potential to it, that it is, something that people are replicating. And I would view that like imitation is the highest form of flattery. I've always thought that. And I always take it positively. And I honestly don't even worry about like the credit thing too much, right? Because you're totally right. There's in the book writing space, this has come up a bunch, right? There's a lot of these folks that are sort of doing their book chapter by chapter on Substack now, instead of sort of, signing the trad 2 to 3 year deal with a publisher, and where, to your point, your idea waits so long to incubate before it hits reality. Whereas if you could kind of iteratively refine your idea and put it out into the public, and then you package it up, I think there's a ton of potential there. So I think that's very, very cool. Absolutely.
All right. So I stopped you at part 3 of 4, just around.
Yeah. I mean, the last part is very related to what you're saying too. Is like, a lot of folks ask me, is like, well, I love all my AI influencer friends, but I think one of the things is like, they say, don't hate the player, hate the game. And the game on social media incentivizes the Excel is cooked, Hollywood is cooked, everyone's cooked every single day, all the time. And all these old tools are dead. And, MCP is a great example of like, LLM sort of breathing new life. I wish I actually shouldn't say new life, but like a way to like, essentially expand the set of like tool use capabilities these systems have, being like the industry standard tools. But the last piece of advice I give people is like, even though you're preparing for the future, I think there is tremendous alpha in learning how to use Photoshop today. I think there's tremendous alpha in learning After Effects, in Maya, Blender, in Unreal Engine, Unity, whatever the ArcGIS, for crying out loud, like whatever the incumbent tool is in your industry. I think there is so much value in figuring out how the status quo, the right way to do things in quotes are, so you can figure out what to discard and throw away. And B, at some point, you may just be telling an AI agent to do those things for you. And it's helpful to know, like, I'm working with an editor right now who's doing a bunch of After Effects work for me for this Adobe thing. It is helpful to know what is and isn't possible, so you can articulate your requests and turn your vision into reality in a more concrete way that it is in line with what the capabilities of those tools are. So those are my 4 pieces. And yeah, I mean, like, the last thing I maybe would say there is like, this thing is like, it feels like, again, because of this sort of incentive structure on social media, particularly X and LinkedIn, and even YouTube to an extent, even Threads and Instagram, like, all social media, I guess, has this, where you stop the scroll by having some provocative claim. I would tell people that it is still early. I think these Lego bricks that are already public and out there, they still have not been put together in the most obvious combinations, let alone the insights that you are going to unlock when you apply them to your specific creation or business problems in your specific verticals through the lens through which you see the world. And so, like, I would just say, like, gosh, start playing with this stuff, because so many people feel like, oh, it's the ship has sailed. And I've seen so many creators and entrepreneurs pop off very recently because they've managed to put things together in a way that the rest of the world just wasn't, because they had this unique worldview, insight, or idea. And so it's like, it's like just because we're all working with the same concrete doesn't mean like all the buildings in the world have been built already.
Well, one of the interesting things about a lot of these generative technologies is they do allow you to mash up things in interesting combinations that haven't, in fact, been done before. At the same time, I think it's really useful when they do mash things up in a way that has been done a bunch of times before, because you should know that in the process.
It's like the boilerplate stuff, right?
Problem, right?
Yeah, totally. 100% agree.
I remember there was this one a couple of years back where someone who was not a game designer, I forget now the name of the game, but he created a game through what would now be called vibe coding a couple of years ago.
That's funny.
But he ended up rediscovering a game that had already been known. And then, of course, a bunch of game design. He's like, hey, look at this novel game design. And a bunch of people piled on.
Well, actually, this has been done like blah, 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 blah. And I mean, and it's worth double clicking on the point that you brought up of like, you need to grow your skin needs to get thicker if you are going to be on social media, especially if you're going to put your real identity out there. I think a lot of folks will do the anon thing for this reason, because they want that layer of separation, which works really well, to be honest. And what better time to go be like, you could do an anon podcast now. Like Dwarkesh did that podcast with one of these like prolific, like Substack writers, like blog writers in the AI space, Gwern, who didn't disclose his identity. And they did like an Unreal MetaHuman clone, which I thought was really dope. But you could do a whole pod like that, right? And there's a bunch of folks in the virtual production field that have started like kids channels like this, where they're like puppeteering, avatars and doing amazing content that way. But you do have to build a little bit of thick skin, and that is to get critique online or offline. It's just that online people, people will sometimes be a little less nice in the text-based comment medium than they would be face-to-face to you. Let's just put it that way, to put it very lightly. But that's a part and parcel of it. To your earlier point, the feedback that you get, and sometimes you'll get really good ideas like, oh, this is cool. Have you tried this other thing? And so like, especially I feel like in the like sort of the coding communities and the generative AI communities or the creative tech community, if I had to put a bucket on it, there's so much like, oh, that's cool. +1. Why don't you do this thing? That like the community is sort of building workflows on top of each other. And I think there's something very exciting. I had a very fun conversation with the Civitai founders on the TED AI show that people might enjoy, where they saw that community of like folks that were not from an ML background starting to build models, and then other folks figuring out various ways to put that together, and that compounding effect that happened where your, like ideas met reality and kind of the iteration that happens from there on out.
So I'd love to talk about right now the tools you like. A bit earlier, you also mentioned you had a fairly clear idea for yourself of what you thought the next 6 to 12 months look like, and I'd love to hear that. But let's start from like the right now. So you mentioned a couple of tools along the way that you like, but like what are you finding you're using the most, like time-wise?
Yeah, I mean, like, let me pull up this LinkedIn post and just DM it to you because you can include it. Because I answered exactly this question, and this one person was like very kind enough to summarize it all in a LinkedIn post with links. And again, this is also the other cool thing will happen is like people will create derived content from stuff you deliver, and then that content can go basically like, take on a life of its own, and it links back to you and all that other stuff too. And so if I may just find that over here. But as I'm pulling this up, I'll say is like you, I use all the LLMs, and I've kind of started viewing them as like, kind of like members of the team, if you will. And right now it's definitely a lot of ChatGPT. That's the mobile app I use probably the most. And then, here we go, found link, and let me copy paste it for you here.
And I'll reveal my answer in a moment too.
Here, if you could just cast this up, Oscar, and I'll paste the link here. So yeah, these are sort of the tools that I end up spending the most time with. Like it's a mix of like commercial tools and, models and like hardware even. I'm not going to go through all of them, but what I'll tell you is like, if you're not using LLMs, you have to. And so for me, it's GPT-4o for sure. But it's also heavily AI Studio. And I've very recently started using Gemini, the Pro subscription as well. I'm predominantly for deep research. But 2.5 Pro is amazing. So between 2.5 Pro and O3, those are probably the two models I'm spending the most amount of time in. And it's kind of funny because that was like Claude 3.5 for me for the longest time. But I'm waiting to see what response Anthropic has in the space. Because right now, I don't know. And I kind of feel like that about Perplexity too, is like I was using Perplexity pretty heavily, 2 or 3 months ago. And then, first with just search getting better on ChatGPT, and same thing with Gemini. And then like O3, especially with its ability to sort of do multiple searches, generate widgets for you on the fly. It's just so powerful that I find myself using that more. I'm sure Arvind and the team are going to come up with something compelling that brings us back. But the tools keep changing, right? In image land, gosh, all the stuff, let me go by modality, maybe that's the one way to bring sanity to all of this, is like, I definitely was a Midjourney stan. And it's funny, I made a joke that like when Nick St. Pierre, who's a homie, and is obviously I would say the ultimate Midjourney stan, when his posts become disproportionately about some other model, that's when we need to move off of Midjourney. And I think we've reached that tipping point where he's writing a lot more about other image and video generators. And gosh, like GPT-4o, I talked about this already in the Gemini image gen, absolutely amazing. Use that heavily. I use Flux a lot. I found myself gravitating more towards things like Krea.ai, Krea.ai, and also like to a lesser extent FreePic. But I know some of the folks behind gosh, what was that super resolution tool? How am I blanking on his name right now? But the Super S tool that's in FreePic, I use that heavily, and so they've been encouraging me to use it. But I like Krea for the UI. You can access all the other models there too. And the video model I use the most is still VO2. It's just, if I'm doing text to video, I am using VO2 by Google inside of Video Effects. It's available for GA in most countries now, or a lot of countries, I should say. And when it comes to image to video, it keeps changing a lot, man. I think Kling is still pretty fucking good. Sorry, I don't know if we can curse on the channel, but it's pretty freaking.
So it's okay.
It's pretty freaking good, and
it's fucking all right.
Especially the recent update that they came out with. So it feels like this like funny race where like the various like competitors, one juts out ahead and is out there momentarily. So the other piece of advice that I give people is like have a flexible workflow, which is why I think like thinking like a creative director or like thinking like, the conductor of the orchestra is like, yeah, the instruments are going to keep changing, but how to put it all together. And so that's on the video side. I would say for all the Gaussian splatting stuff we talked about when we spoke like 2 years ago, just as, the nerf to, implicit radiance fields to explicit radiance field sort of transition was happening. I still love using Polycam. I think that's a really cool app. And I use that for their like photorealistic capture capabilities, but also creating these like CAD-like abstracted models. And what I mean by that is this, if we want to just pull back the slide here very quickly, just so I add some visuals to the mix here. Stuff like this can be very easily done inside of, there we go. Like stuff like this, if you could pop that back on.
Sharing
sorry, I need to share the other tab. There we go. Like stuff like this, you can do it inside of Polycam very easily. I love using Scaniverse. That's become my go-to splatting app, predominantly because it trains all the splats locally on your phone. And so just think about like how wild it is, like how far things have come, even since we last spoke, where like the stuff that we were training on like a beefy 24 gig VRAM freaking NVIDIA GPU is now the literal phone in your pocket and can train that stuff. And if you do have that beefy GPU, the tool I've been loving is PostShot. It has a really friendly GUI, and so I absolutely love that too. Man, I could keep rattling off other tools here forever.
What do you think on the future of just 3D native technologies where there's meshes and models as opposed to Gaussian splats?
Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, I like Meshy a lot. Speaking of that, like, Meshy's really cool. Trippo is pretty cool too. Like, no complaints there. I haven't seen anything that's sort of like text or image to scene in a largely automated fashion. You see the earliest instantiations of that with some of the MCP demos, but that's still like those demos are pretty cherry picked. If you go use, set up one of these MCP servers, you'll find that the human still needs to do a lot of the massaging to get a good output. And so I haven't seen that yet. And it's interesting. Maybe that's an interesting point to talk about, which is sort of like you're seeing, where is it? Here, I'll bring my slides back. Oh, sorry, Asker, I just stopped presenting there, but let me re-present. There we go. It's like, I think we're headed to this world of like dynamic disposable content. And this whole Jensen quote, which I had a chance to ask Jensen at the last GTC about, every pixel is generated, not rendered. That would make the 3D native thing moot in a sense, right? And if you'd asked me that like pre-VO2 and pre like Sora, I was in the camp that I think you're in, but feel free to update my priors on where you're at now since we last spoke. Is like, I thought you needed an explicit 3D scene graph representation, like that you need something like, where the hell is it? Something like this. Like you need to define what is in the scene and like what the, like you need explicit 3D control. Now, after seeing how far video diffusion takes you, I think Jensen's actually making a conservative estimate of this being like 5 to 10 years out. And the other perhaps indicator,
sandbagging again, just like he sandbags his profits. Okay.
I mean, yeah, like, and this is the reason to like take him not seriously. Is like, of course, Jensen, you think that everything's going to be generated, not rendered, because you're going to sell all the GPUs and the infrastructure to go do that. But I think when you do look at stuff like, I think I have, what is it, like Genie 2 here by Google DeepMind. Yeah. The example of like, given the massive context windows you have, you can go from like one frame to like a 60-second playable world that's largely coherent. And that's where we are now. If you just compound the progress that's happened in image and video gen, I think like interactive playable worlds that are direct to pixels and, you're just like passing on the input and the model is giving it to you. Microsoft has done similar research. All these companies are doing similar research. Man, I don't know if this is just going to bypass a bunch of 3D. And the real, like, I want to say the nail in the coffin, but yet another straw that might break the camel's back is, like, of course, Luma AI, right? And so Luma is the first one that sort of transitioned pretty heavily from, they were a 3D first AI startup. And they moved from trying to do like nerfs to Gaussian splats to let's take on Matterport to let's do text to 3D to fuck it, we're just going to invest in Ray and we're going to go all in on video diffusion. And if you see Amit's recent posts and podcasts, he talks about sort of this is the world engine. This is the path to AGI and having this world engine. And you'll see folks like Jan LeCun, who are obviously very smart and way more than me, poke holes in this. And of course, the homie Gary Marcus will pokes holes in this, like how smart are these models really, et cetera. That's all fine and good. But another straw that got added to this camel's back that seems to be very fatigued at this point is Odyssey ML. And so Odyssey ML, I love what these cats are doing. Like they're obviously like, I can pull up a funny tweet here because the CEO responded to it. So Odyssey ML is a bunch of ex-crews, autonomous driving folks who are very used to this world of high-end sensors and like reality capture and sort of like, creating this explicit, representation of the world and how to semantically decompose it and do all of these other things. And yeah, I don't know. It feels like, here's the tab I'll pull up is like, if you could just flash this, Oscar, is like they have pivoted to video diffusion as well. So they originally decloaked, raised a bunch of money to saying, hey, we're going to create this like image to 3D scene model. They've decided not to even release that and go direct to video diffusion. And sort of the, this is like the trajectory of Luma that I just talked about, where they were like Capture App, then Genie, Ray 2. And then, there you have it. That there's like, this is the answer from Oliver, the CEO, which is like, there is some nuance there. If you want 3D asset level control today, which means the incumbent market, maybe you go down that path.
Yeah.
But hey, don't get me like the unsugar-coated version of what Oliver is saying is there is no market for 3D assets today because it's such a small TAM. But the market for images and video is only growing. And so if you can bypass a lot of that legacy pipeline that you need to get there. I mean, I think that's like the path to invest in. Now, I will call out other startups like, Bharat and his team, this amazing, XUnity co-founders from XUnity that are trying to do that sort of hybrid approach that we talked about 2 years ago. That's super exciting and cool for sure. But man, gosh, it just feels like if you take a company like Microsoft that owns Xbox and a bunch of AAA studios, and Google has YouTube, and a couple of these other companies will, create this data or acquire it in interesting ways. It feels like 3D becomes a means to an end. So if we think content to content, if you can go from the idea for the game or the detailed game design document or whatever, with very, detailed specifications and, storyboards or even final artwork to like a playable experience, does it have to be 3D? Or can we just bypass it altogether? So
maybe we had this interesting conversation just a couple of weeks back with Tejas Kulkarni, who's the CEO of this cool company.
Oh yeah, love what they're doing. Yeah.
3D foundation models. So he had an interesting take, which is if I understand what he said correctly, I'll try to reproduce it. He said that he does think it'll eventually be kind of direct to video presentation from the model. But if you look at what those models are really doing, 3D is such a great optimization that they're really going to optimize around something that's not too dissimilar from 3D kind of oriented world models of how the underlying content is there. And then, eventually we'll have agentic AI, which will just figure something out that we never could have figured out on our own. It'll do something completely different, but at least in the sort of the short to midterm kind of 3D mesh-like models will be there, maybe even though you don't like interact with them directly. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very reasonable, right? That you've got this sort of gradual transition now, sort of meet the existing customers for game dev or visual effects or, even things like, product, rendering and photography use cases, and do some sort of a hybrid workflow. Yeah, but I don't know if that's to the limit. I don't know what the right answer is, right? This is where it's way beyond certainly that fog that's in my mind past 12 months.
So Marty in the audience here on LinkedIn asked a couple of interesting questions. He first asked what's up with organic and synthetic people, which is another kind of AI model. And then he's asking this question here about robots feeding into generative video models. I have no idea on this. Really interesting question, Marty.
Yeah, I've got tons of thoughts. I mean, so I had the 1X CEO in my session at TED. It was amazing. Like Neo is trying to get robots into the home to collect the type of data that you can only collect in a home, like versus a sterilized sort of factory setting, and hoping that the model learns how to operate in all these edge cases and scenarios. And so capturing training data in these chaotic scenarios is very interesting. Meta has an interesting program there where they've got operators and people they hire to collect this type of egocentric data from the perspective of a humanoid, that is us, wearing these sort of glasses, and you have external LiDAR, other external sensor systems, and you get this like everything from like an Indian mom going through like the freaking spice rack, and all of these kind of edge case scenarios and data sets is like, I think very, very interesting. And so you have a huge amount of that data on platforms like YouTube, but not a lot of it is, like, yes, you've got crazy walking tours through Tokyo and San Francisco, but do you have all the scenarios that you might see? So I think, just like a Tesla car is capturing all these edge case scenarios in the wild, compared to Waymo that has to have a smaller number of cars that are doing high def mapping. I think there's going to be a place for both of these approaches of like really high quality sensor systems, capturing the best quality data, and the noisy sensors, capturing all this long tail data, but doing it at scale. And so some combination of that's going to be pretty magical, not just for robots, but for sort of the, AI assistant that's going to be the Jarvis in our glasses or in our homes, right?
Bilawal, this has been an amazing conversation over the last 58 minutes. Somehow in the last couple of minutes, I got to cram into it. What is your vision of what's going to happen?
Lord. I think I don't know what my vision is. I'm figuring it out, but I think the lines between the physical and digital are certainly going to continue to blur. And, the way I view what I'm doing is sort of mapping the frontier of this convergence that's happening and building simplified and detailed maps of sort of this uncharted territory. So I would say that if people are excited about this convergence, and there is the promise and peril of what's going to happen there, right? Like, it was interesting to see the reaction to Shahram Azadi's Google XR glasses demo. There's half the people that are like, "Oh my God, I can't wait for this. Give this to me now." And the other half are like, "What? I'm putting a Ring camera on my face. Like, what? Like, this is like the death of privacy, et cetera, et cetera." And as always, the answer is somewhere weirdly in the middle. And so if these kind of maps of the frontier of, technologies that are connecting bits and atoms are of interesting to you, I would just say, like, check out my Twitter, my X, my LinkedIn, my social media platforms. They're all linked at bilawal.ai. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. As like I build, like I'm slam mapping the space, right? Like simultaneous localization and mapping. And as I'm updating my map, I'm sharing that with you so you can follow along for the ride and figure out what chart you want to navigate through in this future that is fast and perpetually approaching us.
Well, there's your action item. Go to bilawal.ai, just like it is on the screen right there. You'll get that list. We'll also post a link over to that X post where a gentleman was kind enough to list out all the tools you use. Use that. You've got an immediate roadmap to learn a shit ton about this space, and then you'll be all ready to continue learning along with the rest of us and trying to keep up like the rest of us, which is really, really hard. But this has been a delight as usual, Bilawal. Happy to have you back anytime whatsoever. So thank you for taking an hour of your really super valuable time and joining us on the Artificial Intelligence live stream.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, Bilawal, until next time. And thank you, everybody who sat through this and were in the live audience. Really appreciate your time as well. And if you were watching this in a recording, come on live next time. Ask a question like Marty did just a moment ago, and you can be part of the conversation as well. So until next time, take care, everybody. This has been a blast.
Thanks, everybody.